Sophia and her family, her mother Lilia and her father Jonathan, lived in a little village where the grass carried dew in the mornings and the evenings were bright with the stars and the moon carrying faint rays on the light over the fields. She had to been 9 years old and had a fair complexion, blonde hair, watery blue eyes. She liked to dance and feed the cats and the animals that scurried through the village and oftentimes came running up to the steps to her porch. She was a good kid, and you could only oftentimes see her staring at the sunlight or strolling through the fields, catching butterflies, her footsteps mixing with the daisies and colorful flowers, her head pointed upwards, her blonde hair dancing behind her while she strode. It was Sunday, and the sun was shining in the windows. It was 9 o'clock, and her family had gathered to the kitchen for a belated breakfast. Everybody ate, and there was sunshine filtering through the slow rays through the kitchen. Suddenly, Sophia began to choke over her sausage. Her body began to convulse, and her pretty mouth started to tremble. It opened and closed for air in desperation a couple of times, and then her body began to throb. She dropped onto the floor. Her parents did what they could to try to prevent the suffocation. Her father even turned her upside down, but she had continued to choke regardlessly of his efforts. The village doctor took 15 minutes to arrive, and when he did, he was very sorry to declare that Sophia's breathing had ceased. About an hour later, they pronounced her dead in the hospital. The sunny girl would no longer smile at the sunlight or walk through the flowers. Everything was over. The burial was a sad day filled with emerged, deranged, and faint tears, and a faint cold wind. Sophia's body was laying face upwards in the casket, her figure covered in white dress, her blue eyes closed. Her parents saw the casket being brought down to the earth and dug up and it carried down until hitting in the bottom of the pit, and then the earth began throwing over the flowers being planted near the gravestone. It was all very sad and tragic. Sophia's mother, Lilia, had an uncanny dream that night. She dreamt of her daughter. She was dressed in the clothes they had buried her in. A rasping voice came out Sophia's mouth, and she couldn't breathe. Her body contracted violently, and her skin seemed pale and faded. A persistent droning call kept repeating, "Mummy, Mommy." All of a sudden, Lila woke from her dream, fading herself in the cold sweat, her body shaking from the experience. She could hardly fall asleep that night. It seemed that the thing that plagued her dreams throbbed wildly in the room. The darkness was heavy, and there was a complete silence. Lily just stared at her empty bedroom and shakily wondered about her dream. She told her husband all about the following morning. She told him that she ought to visit her daughter's grave because it seemed something was not right. Her dream was filled with so much anguish and sorrow, and things mere words couldn't simply convert. He comforted her, telling her that there was nothing, and that after all the grief and sadness from the tragic loss, is fully normal to experience such dreams and feel systematic notions of sadness and worry and loss. That night, Lila had another dream. This time, her daughter was sobbing and thrashing in the depths of the gloom. She was mumbling incoherent words, and it seemed as though she was suffocating. Sobbing and mumbling, vile sounds dripping from Sophia's mouth, and the image of flashing forebodily in her mind. It was like that for an interminable while until Leo woke up. She looked at the ceiling and couldn't compose herself. She started to cry and thought about Sophia and couldn't fall asleep for the remainder of the night. In the morning, she confided to Jonathan that the happenings of the night, she was hysterical, and no matter how her husband tried to calm her down, she kept insisting that the dreams were real and that something should be done about them. Other, more distant relatives talked to Leah on the phone that day and told her to calm down and not to think about the nightmares. They told her it was perfectly normal to feel that way, and that would be a pass the time. However, Leah still exhibited a strong determination that the dreams were real. However, Leah still exhibits a strong determination that the dreams were real. She thought deep within her heart that her dreams were psychic and that all the strangeness and fatalities rode up within the vision meant that something was happening, and she had to understand what that was. What all the people whom she'd confided told her meant little. She felt that they didn't and couldn't understand what she felt, what there was to know. On the third night, Leah couldn't fall asleep. She laid in the dark room, her heart throbbing, her mind restless and determined. The throbbing permeating her consciousness in the room and in the world about her. It's multiplying and becoming stronger and stronger as though It's multiplying and becoming stronger and stronger as though river breeding off of everything, engulfing completely her mind. Suddenly she got out of the bed, descended in the stairway silently, went inside the basement and grabbed both the shovel and torch. She exited the house and walked for an hour and a half until she reached the cemetery. All night she dug and dug. The image of her little girl in front of her eyes, stifled cries throbbed near her heart, her hands manipulating the shovel differently by the dim light of the torch. Finally, she reached the door of the casket and opened it up, and with trembling hands. Sophia's body had been dressed in white. She had not been facing upwards, but downwards. Lilia turned the body to face her only to bring out the unfathomable into sight. Sophia's nails had been broken and frail blood marks trickled from her fingers. Her mouth abated into bloody corners. The sides of the casket were lined with long, continuous scratch marks, and the air from within was stale and heavy. At the sea, Lila dropped on her knees beside the grave and cried out, "Sophia, what have they done to you?" Her words were muffled and sodden with tears. Her body kept trembling while she cried, and suddenly she heard, "Mom, aren't you happy? Look at me. I can breathe."